In 1867, the U.S. government signed one of the most controversial deals in history, purchasing the entire territory of Alaska from the Russian Empire for $7.2 million. At the time, the press openly mocked the decision, calling Alaska nothing more than a worthless icebox and a foolish mistake of the era. Yet history has proven otherwise, revealing this far north territory to be the greatest wilderness sanctuary on the planet. Amidst the vast expanse of the last frontier, ancient, million-year-old glaciers still carve their way into the ocean, while mystical auroras dance proudly across the freezing night sky. Here, humanity shrinks in the presence of an entirely different world, one where raw, primitive nature holds absolute dominion. Tongass National Forest, the largest national forest in the United States, was born from a series of executive orders signed by President Theodore Roosevelt in the early 20th century. The story began in 1902 when he established the Alexander Archipelago Forest Reserve, the forest's predecessor. On September 10, 1907, another executive order officially created Tongass National Forest. Just a year later, the two areas were merged, forming a massive forest covering most of the Alaska Panhandle. The name Tongass comes from a group of indigenous Tlingit people, the first inhabitants of this land. However, the forest's formation wasn't just an administrative matter. It faced strong opposition from the Tlingit and Haida people, who considered it their ancestral land. After decades of legal battles, they were finally compensated in 1968 with $7.5 million for the land that had been taken. Beyond the story of native peoples, Tongass's history is also tied to large-scale logging efforts, with decades-long contracts signed from the 1950s onward. Paper mills and sawmills operated vigorously for many years, but eventually closed down in the 1990s. The journey from a presidential decision to a forest full of land disputes and economic interests has created a history that is both turbulent and fascinating. Now, before we move on to the next destination, here's a fun question for you. Which Alaska destination is famous for whale watching? Comment your answer below. There is a place in Alaska where you can witness nature reshaping the landscape right before your eyes. That place is Endicott Arm and Dawes Glacier. This fjord was once an ordinary valley, carved and gouged by ice more than a mile thick over thousands of years. When the ice melted at the end of the Ice Age, it left behind towering granite cliffs and deep blue waters. Dawes Glacier stretches over 20 kilometers from the Kenai icefield down to the water's edge. Scientists have recorded that the glacier has retreated more than 10 kilometers since it was first measured in 1891. What's notable is that the fastest retreat has occurred in recent decades, with ice melting at an unprecedented rate. Every time a large chunk of ice breaks off and crashes into the fjord, the sound is as loud as thunder, echoing through the area and startling visitors. The floating turquoise icebergs become resting spots for seals, creating wild and vibrant moments of life. Endicott Arm and Dawes Glacier show that nature never stands still, but is constantly moving and changing. It's a slow but unstoppable process, continuing to write the formation history of this land right in front of us. The world is full of amazing places waiting to be discovered. Subscribe and let's explore them together. If you've ever dreamed of standing in the middle of a vast wilderness where you can watch herds of caribou run past and snow-capped mountains stretch to the horizon, Denali National Park is that place. But few people know that this park wasn't created to protect the beauty of mountains or forests. The truth is, it was established for one specific animal, the Dall sheep. In the early 1900s, a naturalist named Charles Sheldon witnessed these sheep being hunted without mercy, and he feared they would disappear forever. So he spent years lobbying the government to create a sanctuary for them. Finally, on February 26, 1917, Mount McKinley National Park was born, with the goal of protecting wildlife. The name Mount McKinley was chosen just to honor a president, but the native people there always called the highest peak Denali, meaning the tall one. The park originally only surrounded part of the mountain, and it wasn't until 1980, after a major law was passed, that the park was expanded and officially renamed Denali National Park. And that's how it happened. Just from a concern about one type of sheep, an entire vast wilderness was protected. If you enjoyed this journey, you can support the channel with a small coffee yos. Your support helps me keep creating more travel videos like this. Thank you so much. This river, about 40 kilometers long, originates from the Knik Glacier, flowing northwest before emptying into the Knik arm of Cook Inlet. Its water is always cloudy due to the rock flour ground up by the glacier, and the riverbed is wide but shallow with a bottom full of gravel, sand, and fine silt. In summer, water flow can reach 5,000 to 6,000 cubic feet per second, but major floods can surge up to 60,000 cubic feet. Interestingly, a stretch of about 6.4 kilometers above the Hayflats Bridge almost never freezes in winter, thanks to warm water discharged from the Chulitna project. Before 1966, the river also endured fierce floods from Lake George's ice dam outbursts, but when that lake stopped bursting, the flow pattern changed. Geologically, this area was once carved by massive ice sheets over a mile thick during the Ice Age, and as they retreated, the Knik continued shaping the landscape with glacial sediments. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the river served as a lifeline for gold seekers and miners settling in the Matanuska-Susitna Valley. As the second largest island in this volcanic archipelago, it presents a surreal landscape entirely devoid of trees, defined instead by rolling green tundra blanketing dormant volcanic peaks. Unalaska's geography is sculpted by sheer cliffs plunging violently into the freezing Bering Sea, and deep, narrow bays perpetually cloaked in heavy maritime fog. For millennia, the indigenous Unangan people have called this island home, masterfully adapting to the subarctic climate by crafting skin-covered kayaks and relying on the ocean's bounty. This ancient isolation was disrupted in the 18th century when Russian fur traders arrived, transforming the island into a commercial hub. Decades later, Unalaska found itself thrust into the theater of World War II, becoming one of the few American territories to endure direct and fierce aerial bombardments by Japanese forces. The weather on Unalaska changes by the minute, where a clear afternoon can instantly dissolve into a blinding blizzard without warning. This predictability has forged a resilient local culture, one that teaches humanity to respect and flow with the natural world rather than attempt to conquer it. Unalaska is not merely a stop on a travel itinerary. It is a profound lesson in survival, where maritime lore, wartime scars, and the raw power of nature become one. Not just a simple lake, Kenai Lake is actually a massive scar left by glaciers on the Alaska Peninsula. The lake was formed at the end of the last ice age, when the enormous ice sheet retreated and left behind a deep basin. The ice from the Kenai Mountains carved and deepened the terrain, creating a lake stretching about 35 kilometers. The lake's water comes primarily from melting ice and glacial streams flowing into it, carrying large amounts of rock flour. It's this suspended glacial flour that gives the lake its distinctive turquoise color. The lake's color changes with the seasons when glacial melt is strongest in late summer. With depths reaching up to 540 feet, Kenai Lake could swallow a 50-story building. The lake acts as a natural regulating basin for the entire Kenai River system. Water flowing out of the lake feeds the Kenai River, supporting 4 species of Pacific salmon. These salmon runs attract brown bears and bald eagles that feed around the lake. Sedimentation continues to occur, slowly changing the lake's shape and depth year by year. Do you think paddleboarding is the best way to experience Kenai Lake? Comment 1 if yes, or 2 if you'd choose a boat instead. Interestingly, Anderson Bay once had a completely different name. In the Aleut language means firewood for starting a fire. That name reflects the deep connection the native people had with this land for thousands of years. The bay lies on the western coast of Unalaska Island, extending about 3 miles south from Mukushin Bay. Geologically, this area was formed from volcanic lava flows and volcanic rock dating back to the Tertiary or Quaternary periods. Ancient volcanoes once erupted and created thick layers of ash and lava, forming the bedrock of the peninsula. Later, ice ages with ice sheets more than a mile thick carved and reshaped the terrain. When the ice retreated about 10,000 years ago, it left behind granite cliffs and U-shaped valleys as we see today. In 1888, the U.S. Fish Commission officially changed the bay's name to Anderson Bay on maps. During the 1970s, the area was found to contain minerals such as gold, silver, copper, and molybdenum. However, no commercial mining has ever taken place there. And although the name has changed, the Aleut people's imprint still remains in the layers of rock and the stories of this land. This river, about 110 kilometers long, originates high in the Alaska Range, where its three branches, the East Fork, Middle Fork, and West Fork, come together to form a single powerful stream. From there, it flows southwest through the valley between the Alaska Range and the Talkeetna Mountains. The river basin was formed from a complex mixture of metamorphic rocks, granite intrusions, and thick glacial sediments, with coal seams from the Eocene epoch embedded along its banks. The river's flow is primarily fed by glacial meltwater, so water levels peak dramatically during the summer months from June to August, when the ice is melting at its fastest. With a watershed spanning about 6,600 kilometers, the Chulitna River plays a vital role in the region's ecosystem, serving as a critical spawning ground for salmon species such as sockeye, coho, and chinook. Although placer gold has been found in the gravel bars and coal seams line parts of the riverbank, commercial mining never really took off due to low concentrations and the region's dense glacial cover. Over time, the river has remained wild and largely untouched by industrial development. Perhaps you didn't know that Portage Bay once had as many as 7 different names throughout its history, before becoming commonly known as Portage Bay. But the truly remarkable story of this area began on March 27, 1964. The entire Portage area subsided by up to 2.4 meters. As a result, high tides flooded approximately 18 kilometers squared of land that had previously been above sea level. Mud and sediment from Turnagain Arm quickly covered the area, forming a new layer of deposits averaging 1.5 meters thick, which geologists named the Placer River Silt. What's truly astonishing is that the sedimentation happened so fast that entire trees were buried standing upright without even having time to fall over. The residents of the Portage settlement were forced to abandon their village and relocate elsewhere. A massive glacial lake was blocked by a thick wall of ice, and every year that wall collapsed like a time bomb counting down the days. That's the story of Knik Glacier, a glacier over 40 kilometers long, located at the northern end of the Chugach Range. For decades, this glacier created Lake George, the largest ice-dammed lake in North America. The annual outburst floods released enormous amounts of water and ice that surged down the valley, causing violent flooding. Scientists have shown that the glacier was formed from two ice branches that merged from the Talkeetna and Chugach ranges during the last ice age. The eastern portion of the ice mass, being in contact with seawater, melted faster, while the western portion melted more slowly. The retreat of this massive ice sheet took about 3,000 years and left behind distinctive geological features, including outwash plains and glacial erratics. Pioneers in the area even held annual lotteries to predict the exact day of the flood. This phenomenon didn't end until 1967, believed to have been caused by the Good Friday earthquake of 1964, which accelerated the glacier's retreat. We gather info from many sources. If something seems off or you've got more to add, drop a comment. Many people have heard of Juneau as the capital of Alaska, but few know the fascinating story of its origins and its utterly unique geography. Long before any settlers arrived, this land was home to the indigenous Tlingit people who had thrived here for centuries by fishing and hunting. The course of history changed when a Tlingit chief guided two prospectors to a hidden creek where they discovered glittering gold nuggets beneath the water. Although the gold rush eventually faded, the people did not abandon the town. Instead, they turned to fishing and mining other minerals to sustain themselves. Schools, churches, and a hospital were gradually built, transforming the rough camp into a real, stable community. Because of its steady growth, Juneau was chosen as the capital of the Alaska Territory, replacing the older city of Sitka. When Alaska officially became a U.S. state, Juneau kept its role as the seat of government and remains the capital to this day. What sets Juneau completely apart from almost any other capital city on Earth is that it cannot be reached by road. Completely landlocked by rugged mountains and massive glaciers, it is accessible only by plane or boat. Nestled spectacularly between the Gastineau Channel and sheer mountain slopes, the city today represents a striking balance between modern urban life and untamed wilderness. It is hard to believe that a bay so desolate, defined only by jagged mountains and crashing waves, could once hold such a turbulent human history. Looking at Mukushin Bay today, you will find no trace of human civilization, yet over 9,000 years ago, these very shores were home to the resilient Unangan people. This unforgiving landscape once sustained them through seasons of hunting and survival, long before Russian traders arrived and swept this bay into a bloody fur-trading empire. Through cycles of boom and bust, every footprint of man was eventually erased by the subarctic elements, returning Mukushin to its primal state. Today, only the towering volcanoes and the vast ocean remain as silent sentinels, guarding the memory of a lost community that time has swept away into the wind. Ketchikan, located at the southern tip of Alaska, began as a summer fishing camp of the Tlingit people, indigenous inhabitants who had lived there for centuries. In 1883, a man named Snow built the first fish saltery, and just a few years later, canneries began to appear along the creek. Pioneers opened a general store and became the first white settlers of Ketchikan. In the late 1890s, the Klondike Gold Rush drew thousands of people northward, and Ketchikan became a crucial supply stop. The city was officially incorporated in 1900, becoming the first city in Alaska. The golden era of the fishing industry took place in the 1930s, with 13 canneries operating simultaneously. Japanese, Chinese, and Filipino workers came to labor in these canneries, forming a multi-ethnic community that lived in the district known as Indian Town. By the mid-20th century, the timber industry replaced fishing with a pulp mill at Ward Cove operating until 1997. Ketchikan has a colorful past, with Creek Street once notorious as a vice district filled with brothels and rum running during Prohibition. A city born from fishing, through all its ups and downs, still stands firmly on pilings in the middle of the sea. It is truly impressive that such a small fishing camp could become one of the most remarkable destinations, originating from the confluence of its north and west forks near Chena Hot Springs in the White Mountains of Alaska. The 100-mile-long Chena River has written its own geological story. Its current meanders westward through the interior before emptying into the Chulitna River near Fairbanks. The main channels of today's Chena were once formed as ancient sloughs of the Chulitna River itself. Its geological journey is further recorded in the pelitic schist bedrock of the Yukon-Tanana terrain, upon which the river's floodplain was established. The river has witnessed dramatic changes brought by human hands, particularly following the historic flood of 1967. This flood led to the construction of the Moose Creek Dam, a flood control project completed in 1980 and officially operational by 1981. Since then, the flow into downtown Fairbanks has been regulated, capped at a maximum of 12,000 cubic feet per second. The Chena is also a living heritage, known to the indigenous Tanana Athabascan people as River of the Wild Animals. Chena is no longer merely a waterway. It has become an indispensable part of memory, where geological history and indigenous culture interweave into the modern rhythm of life in Alaska's interior. There is a world where blue belongs neither to the sky nor the ocean, but emanates as a surreal, million-year-old ice of the Mendenhall Glacier. The magnificent, ever-shifting ice caves where sunlight filters through frozen ceilings, creating natural crystal domes that change hue by the hour. This valley was originally named Sitantagu by the indigenous Tlingit people, meaning the glacier behind the town. It was later renamed in 1891 to honor Thomas Corwin Mendenhall, a prominent American physicist and surveyor. Unlike the total isolation, Mendenhall offers a dynamic contrast between raw wilderness and human accessibility. Right at its terminus lies a massive freshwater lake, where towering icebergs break off and float like natural sculptures. Nearby, the roaring Nugget Falls plunges down a sheer cliff, adding a thunderous symphony to the visual grandeur of the valley. Ecologically, this area serves as a vital corridor for black bears, spawning salmon, and mountain goats, thriving in a transitional landscape recently exposed by retreating ice. Yet, Mendenhall stands today as one of the fastest receding glaciers on Earth due to global climate change. The annual disappearance of its iconic ice. Driftwood Bay is a raw, wind-scoured inlet almost entirely cut off from the modern world. For the indigenous Unangan people who inhabited these shores for millennia, this bay was a priceless gift from the ocean. The geography here is dramatically bleak, framed by sheer volcanic cliffs and rugged tundra that turns into a white desert during winter. During the Cold War, the profound solitude of Driftwood Bay was temporarily broken when the U.S. military established an early warning radar station here. Today, that military outpost lies abandoned, leaving rusted concrete relics standing amidst the wild elements, creating an eerie, surreal landscape. With no roads leading to its shores, the bay remains accessible only by navigating treacherous seas or via helicopter during rare windows of calm weather. Tucked away at the windswept edge of the Aleutian Islands, Captain's Bay is a deep, narrow inlet carved directly into the frigid Bering Sea. Long before the arrival of Russian fur traders, these protected waters served as the lifeblood for the indigenous Unangan people for millennia. The geography here is defined by raw, jagged cliffs wrapped in dense fog, framed by dramatic volcanic peaks blanketed in emerald green tundra. Today, this calm sanctuary sits adjacent to Dutch Harbor, America's top commercial fishing port. Yet, the current serenity masks a turbulent past. During World War II, this remote outpost became one of the few pieces of American soil to suffer a direct aerial bombardment by Japanese forces. Rusty military remnants still scatter the surrounding hills, standing as silent sentinels to a dark chapter in history. For most of the 20th century, Taku Glacier did something almost no other glacier in the world was doing. While its neighbors in the Juneau icefield steadily shrank, Taku kept pushing forward, gaining nearly a foot of thickness every year for over 50 years straight. Tlingit oral histories describe an even older pattern, telling of times when the glacier advanced so far it dammed the Taku River entirely, creating a lake that separated coastal families from those living inland. People crossed the ice itself to trade between the two sides. Scientists studying the glacier today measure it at nearly a mile thick, making it the deepest alpine glacier ever recorded anywhere on Earth. That sheer mass is part of why Taku held out against warming for so long, building up a wall of sediment at its leading edge that protected the ice from the water below. Researchers from the Juneau Icefield Research Program have tracked it from huts and tents on the ice itself since the 1940s, making it one of the most closely watched glaciers anywhere. Glacier Bay National Park is one of the youngest landscapes on the planet, and that's not a figure of speech. "300 years ago, this entire bay didn't exist. A glacier filled it instead, stretching out toward the ocean so far that explorers sailing past in the 1790s described nothing but a wall of ice as far as they could see. The Huna Tlingit had lived in this valley for generations, fishing a river that ran where open water sits today, until the glacier advanced so fast their oral histories describe it moving at the speed of a running dog. They left their homeland behind and resettled south, in what's now the village of Hoonah. When the naturalist John Muir arrived decades later, the ice had already pulled back more than 30 miles, and the Tlingit returned with him to find their valley transformed into a long fjord of open water. The retreat never really stopped. Today, ships travel over 60 miles into the bay along channels that were buried under glacial ice within living memory, and new bare ground keeps appearing where the ice used to be. Mount Edgecumbe is the volcano standing watch over Sitka, and the Tlingit named it for the flash they saw when they first arrived. That eruption is what likely drew people to settle these islands in the first place, and it's been dormant ever since, quiet for so long that locals mostly forgot it was a volcano at all. Out on the water surrounding all of this, sea lions haul themselves onto navigation buoys to rest, packing on so tightly that the buoys sometimes tilt under their weight. Bald eagles are common enough here that they perch in trees along the shoreline like they own the place, which in a sense they do. The islands scattered through Sitka Sound are mostly uninhabited, thick with spruce and hemlock right down to the rocky waterline. Cruiseoff Island, just across the Sound, has no permanent residents at all, but it does have around 1,000 brown bears roaming its forests and beaches. Fishing boats work the calmer water of Silver Bay, tucked into the Tongass National Forest just outside town. Sitka itself sits on the Pacific side of these islands, the only town in this part of Alaska that actually faces the open ocean instead of the sheltered inland waterways. Ravens wander the streets here with the same confidence as the eagles overhead. Black bears move through the wooded edges of the community, often enough that residents barely look up. Resurrection Bay stays ice-free all year, which is the entire reason a town sits at the foot of these mountains in the first place. A Russian fur trader sheltered here during a storm in 1792, and because it happened to be Easter Sunday on the Russian calendar, he gave the bay its name. More than a century later, railroad engineers landed by steamer and chose this same harbor as the southern endpoint of a planned line into Alaska's interior. The town that grew up around the dock took its name from William Seward, the man who had negotiated the purchase of Alaska from Russia decades earlier. Boats still fill the harbor every morning, and Seward remains one of the most productive commercial fishing ports in the country, with tens of millions of dollars in catch moving through these docks each year. The mountains pressing in close behind downtown aren't just scenery. Mount Marathon rises so steeply right at the edge of town that every July, runners race straight up its face and back down again, a tradition that's been going since the early 1900s. In 1964, a massive earthquake centered just up the coast sent tsunami waves into the bay and tore through the waterfront, destroying most of what stood here. Seward rebuilt anyway, and pieces of that old shoreline are still visible if you know where to look. Alaska returns to its original silence. Once dismissed and doubted in history as a worthless icebox, this land has proven its irreplaceable ecological and natural value. It remains a story of a world where humans are merely visitors, and nature is the true master. Our journey into the last frontier concludes here. Thank you for spending your time with us in this episode.